right, well, welcome to group 2 here. So you were hearing all about resistance down at the other tent, and what I'll try to aim to do here at this tent is talk to you some about some of the seed treatments and some of the newer in-furrows that are on market right now. So I'll start with a few handouts. So if you want to pass these around, there's a front and a back to these, and it'll show you 2 of the fields that we'll end up looking at while we're out here today. And so this first field is the one we're standing right kind of in the middle of. And this is one that it's a 3-treatment trial. So we've got totally plain seed, and then we've got 2 seed treatments that are Sultro and Olivo. And those are our seed treatments that are actual fungicides that have nematocidal activity. So we're going to talk today some about biologics, and then we'll also talk about chemicals. But the Sultro and the Olivo are the 2 chemical products that are on the market. And so those ones, because they have fungicide activity as well, they're labeled for both soybean cyst and root knot nematode, but we also get a little bit of activity for some of this that you may see low canopy, that's septoria. We don't often think of that one as necessarily impacting yield all that much, because usually it'll just kind of hang out in the low canopy. You may lose a few leaves, but overall soybeans are fairly resilient to losing a few leaves without it impacting yield too bad. So with these, as I mentioned, we've got this plain seed, we've got the Sultro, we've got the Olivo. Now, one of the biggest things that we see in seed treatments is the timing that we're planting. So these were all planted in April. And what we see in some of our mid to end of April planted beans is that one of the biggest effects from seed treatment is just helping with that stand and emergence. So I'm going to pass around 2 pictures here. This one's 18 days after planting, and then we've got 28 days after planting. And what this is showing is we've got the plain seed on the far left, the Olivo and the Sultro. And you can see from these pictures just that plain seed is slower to come out of the ground, and we don't get quite as much emergence as well. So when we talk about seed treatments, nematodes are there all season. You know, that seed treatments only really have an activity for a little bit of time at the beginning. So often some of the yield response, if we do see it, may not necessarily be directly tied to nematode population, but to some of these other factors like even emergence and having a good stand. What we've seen across the past couple of years with many of our seed treatment trials is we can expect somewhere in that 2 to 5 bushel neighborhood might be what we see as an increase when using a seed treatment. And again, this is when we're planting early beans. As you move into later planted beans, we sometimes don't see that as much because beans are getting up and out of the ground so fast. We may not see some of those differences in stand emergence and the speed to which they're coming out of the ground. I'll pass the next one around. So in addition to our chemical products, one of the industries that's really expanding rapidly right now is the biological market. So there's all kinds of new biologics that are coming around, and we've been trying to test some of those in the past few years. So this one that is coming around now is kind of the highlights from a trial that we did in 2020 and 2021. So out there we had a plain seed. We had just a base treatment, so more of the fungicide compositions that are going to help with some of our damping off and some of those other types of things. And then we had layered in on top of that base different types of nematicides. So we had the Sultro and Olivo, and also a number of biologics that included Chloriva, Trinemco, Avio PZ, and BioST. And with these biologics, there's 2 forms that can happen. So some of our biologics are actual living organisms, so they're going to, be on that seed treatment, and the idea is they're actually going to colonize that root system. They're going to live there, kind of make a protective barrier, and block that nematode's entry into the roots. And then there are some of these biologics where they've actually been heat killed, and so in that case, what's happening is that organism is producing some sort of toxin or something that's not desirable to the nematode. And so in that case, we have an organism that's no longer alive, so it's acting as that seed treatment, going to have some effects early on, but we're not going to see it extend throughout the season the same way some of these other ones where hopefully we're getting colonization and that biological organisms living through the season. So there's a number of organisms that are out here, and you can kind of see some on this table, what the specific organisms are and what they're targeting. Happy to answer any questions that you may have on any of those. And then one of the organisms that we are also looking at this year in some new products are two types of bacillus, which are being applied as an in-furrow treatment. And so as we move further down on the back side of that first map that I handed you, the one that has a few more blocks on it. So this trial is one that is new for this year. We've got our untreated seed, like we have in the past years, that Saltro seed treatment. And then we have this new product that's called Zeronar. And so this one is actually being applied in furrow with sort of the interest that's been rising with corn in furrow products. They're beginning to test some soybean in furrow products as well. I'm not sure as many people are positioned with equipment to be able to apply in furrow at soybean planting. So they are actually looking at that one. The avodagen on there too is the same two biologics, but they're in a seed treatment format as well. So right now, kind of looking at that in-furrow option as well as the seed treatment option. And then in this trial, we also have, again, the Theriva and Abeo. And in front of each of these, we've got some buckets that are dug, and we'll have you tour those in just a minute if you want to take a look at some of the root systems and how things are forming. But before I let you break, the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about a little bit was nematode sampling. And so in these trials, this field has been soybeans for a number of years, and we have natural populations of SCN. But one thing that we like to do for these types of trials is at the beginning of the season, right at planting, we'll take a nematode soil sample. We then take another sample about 30 days after emergence, and then we'll take one before harvest. And so we're trying to track that nematode population through the season. And what we are kind of beginning to see is that winter temperatures can play a role there. In 2019 to 2020, we had pretty mild winter, and this field started with very high populations. I was in a part of a national group, and there were 16 states involved, and we came in second for the most nematodes. So not necessarily the news you want to see, but we were like, okay, well, we can grow nematodes here. But fast forward to this season, we had a little bit of a colder winter, and our populations were much lower going into this season. And so that's something that we want to keep in mind, because when we have some of our milder winters, nematodes are reproducing about every 30 days. So the higher that your population starts at the beginning of the season, chances are the higher it's going to track to the end of the season. And back in 2020, I was in a number of fields where folks had double crop systems that, they had done that particular rotation in the past, never had any issue. But that year, their beans that they put in double crop really got hit hard with nematodes. And in particular, it was a lot of root knot nematode fields that year. But tracking back, we're guessing that probably those populations started a lot higher, may have gotten an extra generation in on that first crop, and then we really saw some damage in that double crop. So the advantage of soil sampling is it gives you that idea of what's going on out in the field. And there's two approaches we can take to soil sampling. So one is if you have a troublesome spot that maybe hasn't looked right the past couple years, we can go take a sample in that area, and then a nearby area that looks better. Like, these are the beans we want to be growing, these are the beans we don't want. And is the nematode count the difference there? The other type of nematode sampling we can do is if you've never sampled a field before and just kind of curious, like, what's going on around here. And in that one, we just sort of randomly move through the field in a zigzag pattern. Could be a W, could be a Z shape, anything that's got some random shape to it. And the idea is we want to just collect different soil samples, mix them into a bag, and get more of a field representative sample. So a standard soil pouring probe, if you're out doing some nutritional samples, you can use the same soil probe. So I often try to take most of my soil samples more towards August, September for soybeans. So that way we're catching them at peak population. So if you're already out in the field doing some sampling for other reasons, then you can just add a few extra pours and get a nematode sample as well. There are two labs that we can send off to. One's in North Carolina and one's at Virginia Tech for running these nematode analysis. And if any of you have interest in sampling any of your fields, please let me know, because I've got a number of ongoing grants right now where we can submit those samples for you. It's free of charge, so just have to pass them along to me and I can send those off for you. So if you have any fields where you'd like some sampling, just let me know and we can get connected after the field tour today. So you've got your 2 plot maps here, and just again to orient you, we are standing right now in Rep 3, so that's going to be these middle bars. And so in this first 3 treatment trial, we've got our signs out front. So this one is a plain seed, then we've got our Saltro and Olivo, and then the 4th bucket down starts this second trial, where again we're in this Rep 3, so just follow that number 8 would match to the 8 over here on the treatment list. So we've got a number of these where, especially with the biologics, some of the other aspects of them, maybe increased root branching and other things. So we've dug, if you want to take a look. I will note on this particular trial that's in front of us, I passed that picture on earlier of poor emergence on things that didn't have a seed treatment. Well, our untreated seed in this one really had bad stands this year. But as a result of that, with the plants having so much space, the plants that do exist have turned into jumbo plants. So it'll be fun to see on these what that final yield ends up coming out to. But if you wonder why these plain seed ones are looking really jumbo, it's because our emergence on that one was kind of more in the neighborhood of 40 to 50% emergence, whereas our treated seed was more in the 85 to 95% emergence range. So took some hits on emergence there this year. But we've got a few minutes, so feel free to wander and take a look, and I'm here if you have any questions.
Biological seed treatments, do they have a shelf life?
That's a great question. So biological seed treatments do have a shelf life. Most of them, it's within a year. Some of these newer ones, they do now have shelf lives of 2 years, but on the bottle, they'll usually indicate. The other thing to be really careful of with biologics, and I mean any product in general, but especially with the biologics, is temperature. And anywhere that you can try to keep things at a temperature control, so they're not going through these extreme heat, extreme cold events. It's good for your regular chemicals too, but especially with the biologics, they can be really sensitive to some of those extremes.
A sprayer's been here for too long ago, I guess.
Yeah. we had a visit from a sprayer to help us with a little bit of stray grass, so we were looking nice today.
We're all
Does early planting help and control, give the plant a boost, because as compared to a later planting when the soil gets hotter and warmer if you're using biologics?
So it's one of those that there's not definitive data, but I would say from a microbial activity, you're maybe better to delay a little bit because that bean is maybe going to get up out of the ground faster. There's less things that it has to compete with early. When we plant a lot of these, especially some of the early and mid-April beans, or really pushing those early windows, they're going to sit in the ground a lot longer. And so this particular field doesn't have a history of soybean sudden death, but that's another one that is good to keep an eye out on, and especially when you plant earlier and that bean's in the ground longer, you have a higher risk of that SDS infection happening. And soybean cyst nematode and SDS are like best friends. And so when you have a field where you have both of them, they tend to hop along together. So one of the ways to kind of escape SDS is to plant a little bit later. And a lot of these seed treatments are also kind of trying to target SDS. In this particular field, we can't test for efficacy, so we don't have any fusarium in here. But yeah, to kind of make a long answer a little shorter, I think delaying a little bit can actually help you more from the nematode side. But it has to come down to your operation of if you need to get things in the ground, if you've got schedules you're trying to stay on, what decision ends up being best for the operation.
Does that also apply to the seed treatment products?
So I would say with the seed treatment products, you're going to see the biggest effect of those when you plant early. As you start planting later, the plant can kind of do its own thing. It gets up and out of the ground. It doesn't rely on that seed treatment as much. So, I think maybe that sweet spot is if you're in kind of that end of April, first week of May, using the seed treatment. That's probably where you're going to see peak performance of both. But again, kind of some of the speculation there, we don't have all the data cleared on that one.
The commercial seed treatments, that's not just the bad stuff, that's that's a package of various different.
Yes, and that, especially for this trial that I passed around, do take note of that one, because on here we've got plain seed, we've got just that fungicide and insecticide base, and then that base plus the nematicide. And what you see there is that really that base is what's giving you a lot of the early season protection, whereas the nematicide sort of some different activities that are going on there. So I'd say, your seed treatment, you're really going to see those effects the earlier you're planting. And a lot of that is coming from the base package that's on there.
How long has this been in soybeans?
This has been in soybeans at least 6 years. But I think before I got here, it was the SCN field and had been in like soybeans for quite a number of years. Then there was maybe 1 or 2 rotation years before I got hired. And then since I've been here, it's been soybeans again for the past 4 years.
So what about if you rotate the corn into this?
Yeah, so corn rotation is a great thing for soybeans. So we're kind of oddballs because, we don't mind having SCN because we want to be able to test and let you know if products are working. But for your fields, if you have SCN problems, rotation is a great thing. Corn is not as good of a host for soybean cyst nematode. So that's a great partnership to have there and to try to help knock back some of those soybean cyst numbers. When we move to our root knot field, root knot is one that's a little trickier because it has a much wider host range than soybean cyst. But for soybean cyst, rotation is really great to use. So, trying to use our resistance, trying to use some of these seed treatments and options that we have and rotating the different hosts are all great tools to have in the toolbox. And, none of them are going to be that silver bullet. That rotation isn't going to magically make the nematodes go away, but it can help them start at lower populations, and then you kind of see that benefit of not having as much of a rapid growth through the season.
Lisa, do you know the per acre cost of the seed treatments and the per acre cost of biologicals?
I don't have numbers that I can readily give you because I feel like the markets are kind of rapidly changing on those, but at the moment, I'd say they're fairly comparably priced. It's interesting with some of the biologics having sort of this like rush. I don't know. A lot of times there end up being incentive packages that are going to vary from company to company, and what else are you partnering it with?
And if you're a grower that could possibly be a thought leader and give testimonials.
Yes, so that price ends up being one that's hard to track down to have any solid standard prices for one thing or another.
And on the seed treatments, there's most of them it's 2 different rates. It's one rate if you're just using it as a fungicide or insecticidal product, but if you want to get the SDS or the nematicide benefit, you have to put a double rate.
Yes, and that's a great point. So he was talking about some of the rates, and so a lot of these products that are both insecticides and nematicides, or fungicides and nematicides, that nematicidal activity usually comes at the cost of having more product on there. And we're going to see that in particular with when we head to our root knot field. I'll talk about a few products there that it's kind of the same thing of if you want to use it as an insecticide, you can use a lower rate. But if you're trying to get that nematicide, you really do have to put that high rate out there to see anything happen. Wonderful. Well, feel free if you want to wander for a minute or two, and then after we're at this stop, we'll be loading up again and head down to our root knot field.